Well, I don't know that anyone in our church has a famous brother or sister, but if you do, and I somehow missed that, let me know. We'll talk about it. Love to hear that story. But just imagine for a minute if some of us did. Somebody had a sibling that became a celebrity. What if your sister married someone who was famous, or your brother became a YouTube star, or what if your sister was on magazine covers and walking red carpets, doing press tours? It would make your family gatherings a little different, wouldn't it? It would be strange. You'd be proud of them, but even if you love them, it might be kind of awkward in some ways. They'd always be your sibling. They'd always be like your brother, the one who shared your room and annoyed you, the one who tripped over the dog and cried that one time. Well, this tension with famous people in their families gets played out all the time. It's being played out today all the time. I don't know if you recognize these folks. That's Oliver Hudson. He's an actor, not quite so famous, and his sister there is Kate Hudson. So on the podcast Sibling Revelry, Oliver talked about watching his sister get famous. And he said he was proud of her, but he was also envious, and he felt overlooked. So even in a good family, fame can put pressure on other people, on the relationships. Or think about Elizabeth Olsen. She is pictured there with her sisters, Mary Kate and Ashley. When Elizabeth started her acting career, she didn't even use her last name because she wanted to avoid comparisons, because it was just kind of weird. Her sisters became famous really young. Well, these stories point to something that is just part of human nature, and that is when someone close to us starts to shine, it can stir up mixed emotions, pride and joy, but also confusion maybe, or competition, or even resentment. So let's not be too surprised then when we read that Jesus' own brothers struggled a little bit. Even his own brothers didn't believe in him. Imagine growing up in a house where your mother believes your brother is the Son of God, and he claims to be just that. We just talked about how weird it would be if a relative of yours, of your brother or sister, became famous like a movie star. What if they claimed to be the Messiah, the Son of God, come to save the world? Wouldn't that make Thanksgiving a little weird? Would you lead us in prayer, or wait, should we pray to you, or how does this work, right? How do you handle that, right? Well, in John chapter 7, we see this tension being played out. Jesus avoids Judea because the people there, there's resistance now, and he's afraid or concerned that people are wanting to kill him, and his time, as he said, has not yet come. And his brothers come to him with advice and a challenge that he should go to Jerusalem, kind of go public, show himself, show what he can do. And the key, though, is John makes clear that his brothers didn't believe in him. So what's going on here? Let's talk about this story. And we're going to look in this story at Jesus' brothers, at the crowds, and then at Jesus himself. And we're going to see different ways that we respond to God. So, and we will see then ways that these folks responded, and then it'll speak to how we respond as well. So the first, and there's an outline in your bulletin if you'd like to jot things down. The first response, the response of Jesus' brothers, is not understanding his purpose or plan. So let's start with this question. Maybe it came up for you as we're doing this reading. Why did the brothers encourage Jesus to go to Jerusalem or to the festival? It says that his brothers didn't believe in him. If that's our starting point, they didn't believe he was the Messiah, but they still tell him to go public, to go to Jerusalem, to put himself out there. Why would they say that? What were they thinking? Now, before we answer that, it might be helpful to know, what's this Festival of the Tabernacles anyway? What's that about? So this was one of the most important annual festivals in the Jewish calendar. It lasted for 7 days, And it commemorated the time that the Israelites were in the wilderness and God provided for them. After they left Egypt, they were wandering in the wilderness for all those years. And so for this festival, they look back on that time, and people would build temporary shelters out of branches and leaves, and they would live in those shelters for like days, for 7 days. It was a way to remember how their ancestors lived. Now, that brings a connection because that time that they're commemorating was when the people were in the wilderness and God provided manna for them in the wilderness, and they're celebrating that. Remember, we just talked about this in John chapter 6, this miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 got everybody talking about and making the connection that Jesus was the second Messiah or the second Moses, and Jesus was providing for people, providing food for them. So it made all these associations, and Jerusalem is going to be packed, huge crowds, public ceremonies every day. Perfect time to make a statement. Perfect time to capitalize on the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 that Jesus had just become so famous for, right? If that is, that's what he was trying to do. If that is, he was actually trying to build a strong following. And that's what his brothers thought. And they suggest this. No one who wants to be, this is verse 3, nobody who wants to be a public figure acts in secret. So show yourself to the world. So why would they do this? A couple of thoughts about what was going on, what motivated them. Maybe, again, different commentators suggest different things. Maybe they were skeptical, but they were still intrigued. Like they had seen his miracles, they'd heard the stories, they couldn't deny what he was doing, but they hadn't committed either. Like Mark chapter 3 and a couple other Gospels mention this. There's other indications in the Gospels that his brothers, that his family had different feelings about him. In Mark chapter 3 tells us early on in Jesus' ministry, the crowds are flocking to them, and in fact it says that they're in this place and they don't even have time to eat because the crowds are all over the place. And it says then that his brothers or his family wanted to take charge of him because they thought he was, quote, out of his mind. So that was a couple years ago now, okay? His brothers don't think he's crazy anymore. I mean, they'd seen a lot since then. And yet, they're still not fully there. They still don't believe. It's like half belief, half doubt kind of thing. All right, so that might be one of the possibilities, that they're skeptical, but they sort of believe, but they don't really believe. They're sort of intrigued. Maybe, though, another dimension of this, they wanted him to go public because of what that would mean for them. I mean, they were his brothers after all, and so the more of a public sensation Jesus became, the more that would reflect positively on them. His fame could become their fame. So it's not hard to imagine them thinking, look, if he goes big, if he gets big, then we get big too. And so this might not have been spiritual encouragement, but just ambition dressed up as support. That's one possibility. Another option, maybe they just didn't get his mission at all. In other words, maybe in their minds, they had the idea, which was common at the time, that the Messiah was going to come and lead a political revolution, that he would rally the people and overthrow Rome. Right? That's what they expected of the Messiah, and Jesus wasn't doing that. He's walking around with fishermen, telling strange parables. Seemed like he was avoiding crowds as much as he was trying to draw them, and so their message might have been, hey, you've got potential, but you're wasting it. Stop hiding. Go public. Some people wonder, were they trying to get him arrested? Right? Was this a setup? That seems kind of unlikely. There's no hint of malice in any other places in the Bible. It's probably more likely that they just didn't take the danger seriously. They maybe didn't understand, maybe they didn't know, maybe they didn't believe it was really that big of a threat. And their idea was like, if you're really that powerful, what's to be afraid of? Well, in the end, it's probably a mixture of these. some curiosity, some pressure, some ambition, and a lot of misunderstanding. They didn't believe, but yet they couldn't ignore what Jesus was doing, so they tried to push him into a mold that they understood. They wanted him to prove himself. Jesus was not interested, though, in proving himself. He was interested in listening to the Father. He says in verse 6, "My time is not here yet." I'm not going up to this verse 8 now. I'm not going up to this festival because my time has not fully come. He wasn't, we know he wasn't afraid of, losing his life. He just knew that it wasn't the time yet. He was obeying God. Now, this experience in Jesus' life is sort of telling because it shows that even those who are closest to him still could misunderstand him. It shows us how easy it is for us to project our own desires onto Jesus, our expectations, our timelines. And it challenges us to ask, where might we be doing the same thing? Where might we be treating Christ as, someone who needs to fit into our schedule? Where do we try to help things along if we feel like things are moving too slowly? Jesus' brothers didn't hate him. They weren't the villains in this story, but they were just blind to the kind of Messiah he was, blind to the timing that God was working with, that Christ was following, and probably also then blind to the cost that his mission would have. And we can be too. We can sort of circle the Christian faith and think about Christ, admire his teaching, seek to follow it in some ways, and yet still not really trust his purpose and not surrender to his timing. So that's the invitation here, not just to cheer him on or admire from a distance, but to really listen, to wait on his timing, to follow his purpose, even when that purpose and that timing doesn't seem to be lining up with ours. So that's the response of not understanding his purpose or plan, Jesus' disciples. Well, another response would be an uncertain or anxious faith, and for that we turn from Jesus' brothers to the crowds, to the people at the festival. Jesus, we're told, does go to the festival. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Not with a big entrance. He goes privately, quietly, in secret. And at that festival, the crowds are buzzing. There's tension in the air. There's whispers and rumors and confusion. Some are saying that Jesus was a good man or is a good man. Some were saying, no, he deceives people. But the key phrase, if you got your Bible there, is verse 13, when it says, nobody would say anything publicly about him for fear of the leaders. They were not talking about him. They were whispering about him, which reveals the spiritual temperature of the crowd. They weren't plotting against Jesus, but they weren't defending him either. They were caught in the middle, curious, maybe interested. Some of them maybe believing in at some level, but afraid to speak out about it. It's the picture of what we can call an anxious or silent belief. They'd heard about Jesus. Maybe they'd even seen him heal. They liked what he said, maybe even believed something about him, but weren't ready to say it out loud. They weren't ready to stake anything on it. Why? Because they were afraid, right? They were afraid of what might happen to them if they did. They were afraid of backlash. They were afraid of being misunderstood. They were afraid of being maybe banished from the temple by the leaders who didn't like Jesus, and that fear kept them silent. Kind of ironic, we're talking about this on the day that churches around the world are celebrating martyrs, people who are willing to give everything for the gospel, and these crowds were not willing to even speak out loud. And it's easy for us to judge that, but yet we're sometimes tempted too to keep our mouths shut, to keep things, keep it out of the workplace. Don't talk about it at school. Definitely don't post about it online. And so we whisper about our faith, or we change the subject, or we wait for the right time to talk about spiritual things with people, but that time never seems to come. That's not the life that Jesus invites us into. In Matthew 10, he says this pretty clearly. Whoever acknowledges me before others, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But whoever disowns me before others, I will disown before my Father in heaven. That's strong language. And it pushes back against this idea that we can believe in Jesus and then also stay neutral and anonymous about it. And let's face it, some of us are hesitant to talk openly about our faith. We don't want to be pushy. We don't want to come across like that overzealous or arrogant person that everyone avoids. Those are fair concerns, but they shouldn't shut us down. There's a better way. There's a third way here. On the one hand, we could have silence, On the other hand, we have this picture of being aggressive and annoying, like a door-to-door salesman. What about just being honest and authentic about our own story and experience? So that's what we see in John chapter 4. Remember John chapter 4, the story of the woman at the well? After this woman encounters Jesus, what does she do? She goes back into town and talks to everybody in town. She says, "Come and see a man who told me everything I ever did. Could this be the Messiah?" She shares her experience. And by the way, by sharing her experience, that's also sharing her shame. He told me everything I ever did. And she had this backstory that caused her to, we think, was what caused her to be sort of ostracized. She talks about that and talks about Jesus. She doesn't preach. In fact, she just asks the question, could this be the Messiah? And she brings people with her to Jesus. That's what witnessing is. It's just telling people what you've experienced, what you've seen, what you've heard, what's happened in your life. You might be familiar with this guy, Denzel Washington, the actor. You might know this. He has become increasingly open about his Christian faith. And in Hollywood, that is no small thing. Not long ago, he wrote an essay, a first-person essay published in Esquire magazine that talked about how his faith has grown. He's been a part of a church in West Hollywood, and it has become really, really meaningful and powerful in his life. Here's a little bit about what he wrote in this article. He says, "The things I said about God when I was a little boy, just reciting them in church along with everybody else, I know now. God is real. God is love. God is the only way. God is the true way. God blesses. It's my job to lift God up, to give him praise, to make sure that anyone and everyone I speak to for the rest of my life understands that he is responsible for me. When you see me, you see the best that I could do with what I've been given by my Lord and Savior." Then he goes on to talk a little bit about how it's kind of frowned on to talk about this stuff in Hollywood. But he goes on then to end the article, or towards the end says, "But I'm unafraid. I don't care anymore what anyone thinks." So that's boldness. It's honest about his experience. He's deciding not to whisper anymore. And it challenges us. If we really believe that Jesus is who he says he is, then why are we so quiet about it? Some of us are in that situation where we admire Jesus, we believe, but we haven't spoken up. We haven't talked about it, and maybe now is the time. Maybe it's time to talk to that friend about your faith. Maybe it's time to pray out loud with your family, or to be honest with someone about what's changed in your life, or make a post that points to hope and not just opinions. Maybe it's time to stop living in that middle space where faith is real but buried, where it's present but we keep it private. Proverbs 29 reminds us that the fear of man, the fear of other people, will prove to be a snare. Whoever trusts in the Lord will be kept safe. Fear tangles us up. Faith frees us up to speak and to be honest, to be real. So here's the invitation. Don't whisper your way through the rest of your life as a Christian. Let your faith be visible. You can let your faith be visible without being an annoying person about it. Just be honest. Let it be yours. Okay, now we turn to the third perspective in this story, not the brothers, not the crowd, but Jesus himself. And this is the response of trusting in God's purpose and timing. So verses 6 through 10, Jesus gives us a different kind of response. He's not paralyzed by fear like the crowd. He is clear and purposeful. He tells his brothers, my time has not yet come. I'm not going up to this festival. And yet, after they go, he does go privately, secretly. So why does he say he's not going, but then go anyway? At first glance, it might sound like he's being sneaky about it, but he's just got to control the timing. He's not going yet. He's not going on his brother's terms. He's going in a different way because he's got a certain timing that he's going to work with about when he's going to go public and then when there's going to be, when it's all going to end. So Jesus does, he goes, but in a different way with a different timing because his whole life was oriented towards following the guidance and the timing of the Father. His decisions weren't based on the pressure of the moment or opportunities. They were built around, they were bathed in prayer and discernment and obedience. And we need to be reminded of this because there's a lot of pressure in our world. We want everything to move fast. We want everything to happen now. It's all about grabbing all the opportunities, getting it now. We don't like waiting. We don't like slow. We don't like quiet. We want things on demand. We want God to be like Amazon Prime, right? Give it to me, it's 2 days, but in fact, Ronnie Chang, the comedian, talks about this, that pretty soon we're all going to be saying, Prime, 2 days, blech. We want Prime now. Give it to me now. I want to press the buy button and then walk over to my door and open the door and the package will be there now. Prime now. All right. That kind of mindset, it's everywhere in our world. It's how we live. And maybe you feel like it's maybe how part of what's made you successful in certain ways in your life, that aggressiveness. And yet, it's dangerous when that seeps into our faith because God has a purpose and a plan and a timing that doesn't always match ours. And Jesus never pushed against that. He always trusted God's plan. He trusted the pace of God's plan. He wasn't passive, but he was patient. He didn't let pressure shape the direction that he went or the timing of that direction. Ecclesiastes 3 reminds us that there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. God's work has seasons, just like in the natural world. There are seasons. Some fast, some slow, some clear, some confusing, but God's doing a work and doing it in a certain time frame, and our calling then is to sometimes to be faithful and to wait because we trust in God's timing. Now you might be familiar with this. This is a picture of a certain bamboo tree in China. It's kind of an unusual tree because you plant it and nothing seems to happen for a long time. You plant it, water it, till it. Nothing happens for the first year or the second year or the third year. Year after year, you water this thing, you tend it, nothing is happening. Finally, in the 5th year of its life, there's a 6-week period where it shoots up 80 feet. Now think about that. Did it grow 80 feet in 6 weeks? Or did it grow 80 feet in 5 years? Of course it was growing all along. It just didn't see how all that growth was happening. You didn't see the roots spreading. You didn't see the foundations being built. And finally then, when the timing was right, it could shoot up because there was a structure to support it. And is it possible that God is doing that kind of thing in your life right now? That what feels like delay might actually be preparation. What feels like silence from God might just be intentional planning to strengthen your roots. That's what Jesus trusted. He knew his Father's timeline. He wasn't going to force things to happen until it was time. And so that's how he lived. Well, how did he get that clarity? How did he know? How did he know it wasn't time to go? How did he know to not listen to his brothers, which with what probably seemed like good strategic advice? Well, we can't fully know the mind of Christ, right? Obviously, but we do know one thing. We know this for sure. Jesus prayed a lot. He spent a lot of time in prayer. You'll see a connection in just a minute. There's a story in Mark chapter 1 where Jesus is healing and the crowds are flocking to him. He's casting out demons. Things are taking off. It's like success by any measure. But early the next morning, after this great experience, it says that Jesus snuck away off by himself to pray. And then the disciples go looking for him, and they finally find him, and they're confused, and they seem upset. They're like, Jesus, everyone is looking for you. It's kind of like they're saying, what are you doing? Come on, we got a crowd here. And what Jesus says next is, nope, we're going to go to another town because that's why I have been sent. We're going to go to nearby villages so that I can preach there also. That is why I have come. So he follows this call and moves on, even though kind of against something that seems like a strategic move. But he does it because I believe, because he's discerned that guidance through that time of prayer. He moves on because he knows this timing is changing. This clarity, I believe, came through his time alone with the Father, through that time of prayer. And he did that over and over again. When he called the 12 disciples, you remember the night before he did that, he prayed all night. And he wasn't just, spewing words endlessly for 24 hours. He was conversing with the Father. He was listening. He was thinking and hearing and planning, and came away from that time with this direction. So here's the question for us. Is there a place in our lives where things might not be happening according to the timetable that we would like? Maybe where you're tempted to force something? Maybe it's a place where you need to pause and pray. Sometimes waiting feels like weakness, like we're falling behind or we're wasting time. But maybe that faith or that waiting is about trust. And we're not wasting time. We're not falling behind. We're just living in obedience. We're just following God's plan, God's timing, God's pace. It's in the waiting, oftentimes, that God is doing that powerful underground work. All right, so we've looked at three different responses to God in this story. His brothers didn't believe him. The crowd was caught in that in-between place, sort of impressed but afraid. And then finally, Jesus himself shows us a different way, trusting, waiting for the Father's timing, listening before acting. So three postures, and one way or the other, I'm going to guess all of us in the things happening in our lives might fall into one of these groupings, one of these perspectives. Some of us might be like those brothers, thinking that, expecting that God should be operating on our terms, move faster, show up in more obvious ways. Or some of us might be like the crowd, believing but holding back, staying silent. But Jesus offers us something more. He invites us to trust him fully, not just when it's easy or when the timing feels right, but at all times, especially when it's challenging. To speak up, not with arrogance, but rather with honesty. So what's your response today? Where do you need to let go of control? Where do you need to speak up? Or maybe where do you need to slow down and wait? Jesus does not ask for perfection, but he asks for our trust and he asks for our obedience. And he's still inviting us to follow him now.